Hello everyone. We know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, have no worries. I'm Aaron Porras, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
U.S. Congresswomen Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are set to visit Israel and the West Bank next week, and Israeli officials are reportedly bracing for the likelihood that the American lawmakers will be visiting the Flashpoint Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But now, Israeli media is reporting that Israel has decided to bar the lawmakers from entering the country. The unconfirmed report says a final decision is being drafted by the Prime Minister's office before the move is publicly announced. But either way, a secret meeting has allegedly been held by Israel's National Security Council to prepare for the upcoming visit.
Both Omar and Tlaib are Muslim and are reportedly planning to visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock Shrine at the holy site. The officials involved have apparently agreed that if the congresswomen do visit the holy sites, it's vital that Israeli police do not allow them to be accompanied by officials of the Palestinian Authority. They believe that doing so would be a symbolic backing for Palestinian claims of sovereignty at the site. The Temple Mount is the holiest place in Judaism and the third holiest in Islam, and Israel captured the site along with the old city of Jerusalem from Jordan in the 1967 Six-Day War. Both Congresswomen Omar and Tlaib have expressed support for the pro-Palestinian boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement and have courted allegations of anti-Semitism. And it was reported last week that U.S. President Donald Trump criticized the Israeli decision to allow them to visit the country. But out of respect for the alliance between the United States and Israel, Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Ron Dermer said Israel would not prevent the lawmakers from coming to the Holy Land. The Jewish state can prohibit any foreigner who has knowingly issued a public call for boycotting Israel from entering the country, under a controversial law that was passed back in 2017. Now, the former mayor of Jerusalem and current Knesset member Nir Barkat says that he would be willing to meet with Omar and Tlaib if they're, quote, willing to learn and listen.
The far-right Otzma Yehudit party is still in the running for September elections, despite a petition aiming to disqualify the political group. And it's all thanks to a panel that voted strictly along party lines, with 15 members of the left voting yes and 15 members of the right voting no. Ironically, though, it was Labor that saved the day for the far-right group, since their party representative was not present for the vote.
But the panel has yet to vote on the fate of 3 senior members of the party, so the fate of Itamar Ben-Gvir, Baruch Marzel, and Bentzi Gopstein is still up in the air. Speaking of the right, while there may be plenty of bad blood between Naftali Bennett and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that doesn't seem to be stopping Bennett's Yamina party from recommending Netanyahu to form the next government. In a Facebook video, Bennett declared Yamina's clear position after weeks of him being vague about the issue. He even went as far as to say that other members of the right-wing bloc agree with his stance and will back Netanyahu as the next prime minister. Bennett says that unlike Avigdor Lieberman, he's not going to be playing games that may lead to a left-wing government. You'll remember that Lieberman caused a firestorm of controversy during last April's election because he refused to support a Netanyahu-led government. He made the call because he felt that Netanyahu was capitulating to the demands of the ultra-Orthodox parties. As a result, Netanyahu couldn't form a government, leading us to the situation that Israel is in now, 2 elections in 1 year, which is a completely unprecedented development in Israel's storied political history. As of now, polls indicate that we may be headed toward a similar path, as neither Likud nor Blue and White can form a government without Yisrael Beitenu's backing.
Despite several politicians, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying it's never going to happen, many voters on the right are actually in favor of a unity government. This, according to the latest poll conducted by the Israel Democracy Institute.
In fact, the poll reveals that about 42% of right-wing voters would favor an alliance with the center-left Blue and White party. The findings were based on responses from about 1,063 voters who backed a right-wing party in April's election. And for those who backed some of the smaller right-wing parties like Gesher, Kulanu, Yisrael Beitenu, and the New Right, the majority of them favored teaming up with Blue and White. But not everyone is on board with joining forces. 44% of the voters were opposed to this unity government. Of course, the Israeli political scene shifts rapidly, and quite a few of those parties have changed. Here's a quick recap. Gesher is now with Labor, Kulanu is now with Likud, and the New Right has morphed back into the United Right Party. So, like any polls conducted prior to an election, results should be taken with a grain of salt. But speaking of the United Right Party, it now has a new name. Leader Ayelet Shaked announced that the faction, which is comprised of the New Right, Jewish Home, and National Union, will now be called Yamina, meaning rightward in Hebrew. And the most vocal members of Yamina, Bezalel Smotrich, narrowly escaped being fired on Monday. After a series of tweets slamming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the PM is rumored to have been so angered by the remarks that he intended to fire Smotrich. In the tweets, Smotrich was railing against Netanyahu's weak leadership. His grievances included the decision to partially close a Temple Mount to Jews on Tisha B'Av this week, and a court ruling not allowing for gender segregation in a public park. But after a meeting between the two and a forced apology from Smotrich, he was able to retain his job as transportation minister. And sources within Likud say that this latest episode is Smotrich's final warning. One more misstep, and he's out for good.
There's a lot of action on Jerusalem's Temple Mount holy site today. Clashes are breaking out between Muslim protesters and Israeli police forces there as religious tensions rise. At least 4 Israeli officers have been wounded and at least 14 Muslim worshippers have been injured, according to reports.
Sunday, today, marks the start of 2 important holidays for both the Jews and the Muslims. It's the Jewish fast day of Tisha B'Av, when Jews mourn the destruction of the temples that once stood on the Temple Mount, and other disasters in Jewish history. It's also the beginning of Eid al-Adha, an Islamic holiday commemorating the end of the annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. Police initially barred non-Muslims from entering the Temple Mount today, where tens of thousands of Muslim worshippers arrived in the morning. But then after another security assessment, Jewish visitors were allowed to enter the site, with several dozen visiting under close police escort. Muslim worshippers began throwing chairs and other objects at the group, leading the Jewish visitors to leave the compound shortly after. According to police, Muslim worshippers then began rioting and making nationalistic calls, which led police forces on the ground to fire tear gas, rubber bullets, and other less lethal riot control weapons at the protesters. Police have deployed additional forces throughout Jerusalem to prepare for violence throughout the day. Israeli right-wing politicians are criticizing the closure of the Temple Mount to Jewish visitors, blaming Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for the move. A source in the Prime Minister's office is denying that Netanyahu ordered the closure, saying that entry to the Temple Mount is determined according to police assessments of the situation on the ground. The Prime Minister does have the power to override the police's decisions regarding the holy site, but Israeli authorities traditionally close the Temple Mount to non-Muslims during Islamic holidays to keep religious tensions from boiling over. Last year, a record number of Jews were reported to have visited the Temple Mount for Tisha B'Av, causing backlash from the Palestinian Authority and Jordan, which manages the holy site through the Waqf. Because of the controversy in visiting the Temple Mount, last night thousands of Jewish worshippers visited the Western Wall, which is the closest spot to the Temple Mount that Jews can pray.
Tensions are running high on the Israeli right. Right-wing politicians are livid over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to partially close off the Temple Mount to Jewish worshippers during the Jewish holiday Tisha B'Av. But Netanyahu isn't hesitating to fire back against criticism.
Netanyahu says his decisions were based on responsible leadership and consultations with the security establishment. The firestorm of controversy began when police temporarily banned Jews from ascending the Temple Mount on the sacred day because it coincided with the Muslim holiday Eid al-Adha. The overlap of holy days caused bloody clashes at the holy site, with 61 Muslim worshippers injured. But this feud with Israel's far-right may be part of Netanyahu's reelection campaign tactic. According to an analysis in the Times of Israel, Netanyahu is shouting from the rooftops, "Vote Likud or else." Unlike the last election, where Netanyahu encouraged a large right-wing bloc, this time around Netanyahu seems to be campaigning to nab as many Likud mandates as possible. Leaning into the hard right failed him in the April election because he wasn't able to secure enough seats to form a coalition. So where does this leave his main political rival, Blue and White's Benny Gantz? Well, it appeared that Gantz was walking back his claims that he would never sit with Netanyahu in a unity government. According to reports, he even said that he'd consider it, but only if he were to be the first prime minister in the rotation. An article from the Israeli news source Ynet even reported Gantz saying that Netanyahu was willing to form a unity government with Blue and White, as long as Gantz agreed to kick out Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid party. But a short while after the article was published, Gantz issued a retraction, reverting back to his initial position. It looks like Netanyahu is focused on something else entirely, however. According to an exclusive from the Israeli media outlet Times of Israel, the prime minister is seeking a public declaration from U.S. President Donald Trump that would back an Israeli move to extend sovereignty over Jewish settlements in the West Bank. If Trump were to make that declaration, Netanyahu would likely be able to credibly assure right-wing voters that he'd apply sovereignty to the settlements if he were to be elected prime minister once again. During his election campaign back in April, Netanyahu pledged to gradually annex West Bank Jewish settlements anyhow.
The Israeli army has just shot down a fifth Hamas gunman after he began firing at troops on the Gazan border as he attempted to sneak into Israel. Now, the fresh round of fighting comes just a day after the IDF said it killed 4 heavily armed Palestinians who were attempting to cross the border with weapons. All of this comes a mere week after a Palestinian gunman managed to wound 3 soldiers on the border before being killed.
Israeli soldiers opened fire on 4 former Hamas terrorists yesterday after one of them began to scale the border fence. A hand grenade was thrown at the Israeli troops during the clash, but none of the soldiers were injured. The 4 Gazan fighters were later found to have been armed with AK-47 rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, hand grenades, hunting knives, and bolt cutters. All 4 were wearing military uniforms and were also equipped with food and a medical kit. The Hamas leaders of the Gaza Strip are condemning their killing, but have not taken responsibility for the fighters' attempted attack on Israel. Shortly after their infiltration attempt, Israeli jets allegedly targeted an outpost operated by Hamas in the central Gaza Strip. Back on August 1st, a Palestinian man in a Hamas uniform sneaked across the Gaza-Israel border and opened fire on 3 soldiers. He managed to wound them before he was shot and killed in return fire, and Hamas also didn't take responsibility for his actions. Nonetheless, the IDF holds a terror group responsible for any violence that emanates from the Gaza Strip. This latest flare-up of violence comes as organizers of Friday's weekly Palestinian protests on the Israel-Gaza border were called off because of the upcoming Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha, which begins on Sunday. Last week, an estimated 6,000 Gazans took part in the protests.
A Filipina worker and her son's long legal battle has come to a close as the 2 were deported on Monday night after several court cases contesting the decision. The Tel Aviv Court of Appeals reached its decision that the 2 must go back home. So Rosemary Peretz and her 13-year-old son Rohan have finally been sent back to the Philippines.
Like many Filipino women in Israel, Peretz earned her living as a caretaker, and once her employer died, she cleaned houses. But she got into legal hot water for overstaying her visa by an entire decade. Her case is an unusual one as she's the first woman with a school-aged child who was forced to leave Israel. But since around 100 foreign workers were arrested recently, it seems likely that she won't be the last. In fact, 2 other families have been arrested and are also in the middle of a legal battle fighting their deportation. As for Peretz, much of her appeal was based on the emotional welfare of her son. You see, Rohan has special needs, and her attorneys argued that suddenly removing him from the only home that he's known and sending him to a foreign country would cause him irreparable harm. And other activists agree that sending kids who are raised in Israel somewhere else is not in a child's best interest. But the immigration authority says otherwise. They argue that since the boy was raised according to Filipino customs while in Israel, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to acclimate once he's back in the Philippines. Today, there are about 60,000 foreign workers in Israel, most of which are women. The women hail from countries like the Philippines, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, and Moldova. Their hope? That Israel will provide a better life for them and their future children than the one that's waiting for them back home.
The IDF has begun preparations to demolish the homes of the 2 Palestinian men suspected of stabbing to death the Israeli teen Dvir Sorek last week near the West Bank settlement of Migdal Oz. And the military says it's measuring the suspects' homes in the Palestinian village of Beit Kail so that engineers can plan on how to destroy the structures. Still, though, no date has been set for the demolition.
18-year-old Dvir Sorek's body was discovered early Thursday morning on a road leading to the religious seminary where he had been studying as part of a program combining military service and Jewish education. It took security forces a 48-hour manhunt until they were able to arrest the 2 suspects, Palestinian cousins Nasir Asafra and Qasem Asafra. Nasir's brother and Qasem's wife were also arrested in the raid on their home at 3 a.m., and police are looking into whether or not the 2 helped the alleged killers hide after the attack. Sorek's father has thanked Israeli security forces for catching the suspected killers, but still says they must work to prevent future terror attacks. Israel claims that the practice of demolishing the homes of terrorists is an effective deterrent for future assaults, but human rights groups believe it's an ineffective form of collective punishment.
All right, Israel is known for having created the world's smallest tomato, the planet's thinnest cell phone charger, and now, get this, the tiniest Bible on Earth. But here's what's even more exciting. That tiny baby Bible can now be worn around your neck in a groundbreaking line of jewelry. And joining us with the scoop is ILTV's Nittany Manson. So Nittany, please, tell us what's going on.
Hi, Natasha. Yes, so as you said, an Israeli jewelry company has actually teamed up with Tel Aviv University to create jewelry that is just so fitting for the Holy Land. They have found a way to combine religion and technology in a really beautiful way. They've created micro-sized versions of the Holy Book that can be embedded onto a pendant and then worn as jewelry.
I can't even imagine how many people are watching this right now and probably want this. The team that started this was a family, am I right?
That's right. It was actually a mother and daughter who started this jewelry brand, and their family has been in the diamond and jewelry business for a few generations already. And so when the daughter was studying at Tel Aviv University, she was accidentally introduced to nanotechnology. And from there, the duo teamed up with the University Center for Nanoscience and Nanotechnology to create these mini Bibles.
Right, so tell us a little bit more about the jewelry itself. Is the whole Bible and the pendant, it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around this. Are there different kinds of jewelry that you can wear with this? Is it just a pendant? Are there necklaces, bracelets, you name it?
Yeah, well, every chip actually has the whole Bible, the whole 929 chapters of the Jewish Bible, which is about 1.2 million letters.
That's crazy that it all fits on a necklace.
Yeah, it really is. It's some crazy futuristic stuff that's going on here. They offer many different designs. You can get a necklace, a bracelet, a ring, you name it, they've got it. And the nice thing is that they all contain the entire Bible. The pricing really just depends on what piece or material it is. It can cost anywhere from around $80 to $4,000. The technology is the same for each piece, but of course a gold necklace would be more expensive than a smaller one made of a cheaper metal.
Well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So is this actually the first time that a nano Bible has been created? Because you would think that this is something that people in nanotechnology would have done way before.
Well, actually, Natasha, this tiny Bible was created back in 2015, and it was displayed as part of an exhibit to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Shrine of the Book Wing of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. But this is the first time it's actually been made into a wearable piece of jewelry, which is what makes it so special now.
All right, so I guess the real question right now is, where can viewers get one of these pieces?
Yeah, because I'm sure we all want to get one of these.
Yeah.
So right now, the Tanor jewelry line is being sold in select museums, like the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., and the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. But items can also be bought through the company's website or at duty-free on board El Al airline flights.
All right, so for those of you who are interested at home, don't forget to check out their website. And Nittany, thank you so much for joining us with this groundbreaking piece of news.
My pleasure, Natasha.
A fascinating archaeology discovery has just been made out of Mount Zion. Researchers say they've unearthed ancient arrowheads, a rare piece of gold jewelry, lamps, and pottery shards that were all embedded in a layer of ash after excavating the site. Researchers claim that this is evidence of the city's capture by Babylonian forces more than 2,500 years ago.
The discoveries were made by the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. It's fitting that the groundbreaking announcement was made on Sunday, which was Tisha B'Av, the most somber day of the Jewish calendar. The day commemorates numerous tragedies that befell the Jewish people, including the destruction of the two temples, the first of which was destroyed during the Babylonian siege in 586 BCE. But this modern archaeology conducted by assessing stratigraphic layers at a site helps us better understand what happened at that particular time. In this instance, the recovery of jewelry at what is perceived to be a conflict site is unusual because these are items that are usually looted or taken and melted down. In this case, the combination of an ashy layer full of artifacts combined with arrowheads and a very special ornament, a gold tassel earring, indicates devastation and destruction. Now, according to the archaeologists, the findings prop up the biblical account in Kings 25:9, highlighting a spot that would have had excellent views of Solomon's temple to the northeast, as well as a central valley below.
Now, this could be a big deal if it actually works out. Israel's reportedly attempting to host the upcoming Miss Universe pageant. A pair of Israeli producers have apparently been in talks with the organizers of the famous beauty competition, but there are complications over budgeting and the participation of Muslim and Arab contestants.
That's not stopping this pair of Israeli organizers. Danny Ben Naim and Asaf Belcher were already involved in bringing Madonna to perform in Israel at last year's Eurovision contest, which was hosted here in Tel Aviv. And with that big success, it's no surprise that they have the confidence to push for Miss Universe. The producers have already met with Miss Universe organization staff both in New York and in Israel, and the pageant organizers have apparently expressed an interest in holding the competition in the Holy Land. Still, though, several hurdles will have to be overcome to pull this one off. Israel's next government coalition won't be formed until after the September 17th elections, which means that the administration will remain in transitional mode and the approval of a budget for the event may be beyond its scope. Another issue is participation. Miss Universe has participants from over 100 countries, many of which are from Arab and Muslim countries that don't have official diplomatic ties with Israel, and of course may not be happy with the event being held in the Holy Land. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but the Israeli producers say they're still intending to hold the competition in Israel this year, with an option for 2020. U.S. President Donald Trump owned the Miss Universe organization from 1996 to 2015.
All right, now here is an uplifting story for you. Holocaust survivor Shoshanna Ovitz has decided to mark her 104th birthday in a very unique way. She's requested that all of her children, her grandchildren, and descendants come together to celebrate her special day at the Western Wall. And as you might imagine, they were more than happy to oblige.
It was a sight to see on Wednesday. About 400 members of Ovitz's family flocked to the holy site in Jerusalem. Of course, it wasn't easy organizing such a big family get-together. The whole family had to send out emails, messages, and make phone calls, even across the world. 104-year-old Shoshanna Ovitz survived Auschwitz and was separated from her mother there, who was eventually killed by Yosef Mengele. Shoshanna met her husband while the two were searching for surviving relatives after the Holocaust and finally married when she was in her early 30s. They lived in a transit camp in Austria where their first daughter was born before they moved to Haifa and had 2 more sons and another daughter. Decades later, they have hundreds of descendants, and what better way to celebrate Shoshanna's birthday than to celebrate the life that she's brought to the world from darkness. Happy birthday, Shoshanna.
All right, that's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next week for the next episode of ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for joining us.